Okay, welcome to UTOKing with Gregg. I'm super excited today. I have my good friend Jim Rutt here, who I'm sure many people in this space know. The Jim Rutt Show. It's the podcast I compete with and get shamed by. Enjoyed my time on Jim Rutt Show. Obviously Game B is a huge thing. The Sante Fe Institute. There's all sorts. So I'm going to ask Jim a little bit about his history. We'll get into that whole story. But I just want to say that the other thing that's really cool about Jim is that he lives near me.
It's amazing. We discovered we live about 10 miles apart.
10 miles apart, and all sorts of Game B shit was going down, and I was 10 miles away. So you've been a really delight to learn about your vision, Jim. So it's a real wonderful opportunity to have you on the program. Thank you so much for all you've done.
Well, thanks for the invitation. Yeah, we've had some nice chats, both online and once we discovered we live 10 miles apart, in person.
Actually, in person. I've got a 3D vision of Jim. It's amazing.
He's even scarier in real life than he is online.
Yeah, those have been delightful lunches. So actually, as I indicated, I am a clinician. I do like to get people's story. So I like to hear the story. So maybe we could start there. You've lived a very, very rich, interesting life. It's really fascinating to me, given your background and everything else, where the things you have your hands in and your vision and the things you've been involved in. So maybe we could start there and share a little bit with listeners about your background.
Sure. I'll just, I have to admit, I have had an interesting tale, and, I'll try to keep it relatively short. If I go on too long, kind of go like this.
Yeah, well, neither you or I are shy, Jim, about, jumping in. So yeah, I'll do that as needed.
Yeah. So anyway, I was a, classic post-World War II baby boomer, born in the early 50s in a classic post-World War II subdivision of Washington, D.C., kind of on the working class side of things. My dad was a Washington, D.C. cop. And most of my neighbors were electricians and plumbers and meat cutters and the occasional school teacher and things of that ilk.
Yep.
It was a great time to have grown up. DC was quite prosperous. And in, our working class community, there was nobody who was rich or even affluent, but there was also nobody ever missed a meal. So it was kind of in some sense, the perfect place to have grown up.
Class, kind of middle class. And
I would say a little bit below middle class.
A little lower middle.
Lower middle class to upper working class.
Right.
And lots and lots of kids, right? And so you just went outside and you just had a life, and your parents turned you loose in the morning.
They didn't follow you wherever you were. What if you were a mile away?
The idea of helicopter parents was no such thing in those days.
Yep.
In fact, one of my very first memories was bracketing it based on when these houses were built. I had to have been no older than 3.5. Was going up with my next door neighbor, who was a couple of years older than I was, and a famously, shall we say, naughty kid. And we crawled across, I guess it must have been a 2x6, across an open trench into a house under construction and wandered around looking for interesting stuff. And I remember collecting a bag full of the little metal circles that you knock out of the electrical box.
Right.
We call them slugs. And so, here are no more than 3.5, wandering around unsupervised on a construction site. Yeah, parents just thought, oh, well, that's life. So,
kids did die from accidents a little more frequently back then, but at the same time, there was all sorts of glorious freedoms that we
exactly. And I think overall the trade-off was worthwhile. So I went to school and did pretty well in high school, kind of enjoyed it, and went off to college to MIT, which was fairly unusual for my community. In fact, I was the first person, maybe the only person still, to go to MIT from my high school. And it was a bit of a culture shock. I had met very few college-educated people other than school teachers and clergy folks and doctors. So that whole world was kind of an eye-opener to me. And
what was your interest at that time when you went to MIT? Did you have
physics?
Physics. Okay, you were interested.
I was definitely a physics dude. But it's funny, I had an epiphany sophomore year that I just didn't really want, as I said to myself, spend my adult life in a white coat in a damp basement. And because it was clear that while I was definitely good enough to be a physicist, I was not quite of the mathematical ability to be a theoretical physicist. So it would have been an experimentalist, right? And very interesting questions. I was very interested in particle physics and those things, but just had this epiphany. And so I changed majors and ended up putting together one of those cross-disciplinary bullshit majors, right? Which was, a big thing in the 70s. Write your own major.
Hey, it's still a big thing. If we only get more interdisciplinary work, the world's problems will solve.
And but anyway, I was sort of a disillusioned youth by the time I graduated. And when I graduated, I didn't go on a single job interview. I just went back to my hometown, which I enjoyed a lot, and hung out. Got a bullshit job as a car salesman, believe it or not.
Okay.
I was a good enough car salesman to pay off all my student loans in 11 months.
Somehow I see that.
Yeah, exactly. Would you buy a new car, not a used car, car from this man? The answer was yes. Right?
Yes. Well, you're very engaging and charismatic, Jim. So that makes sense.
It was a redneck car dealership in Laurel, Maryland. So that was a fairly good fit socially and personality-wise. It was fun. Then I took off and hitchhiked around the country.
No shit.
I logged 50,000 miles hitchhiking in my youth. And that wasn't all on that trip. In fact, I actually did another long trip right after I graduated from college. I hitchhiked out to California and up and down the coast and round and about. But then I went on a year-long trip, living on $1 a day for a fair amount of it. And got a job in not Silicon Valley, in Sun Valley. Sun Valley, very different Silicon Valley. Working at a convenience store, night shift manager, skiing every day on a Chamber of Commerce pass, and every day, and hung around and came back home.
Okay.
Got a job as a college textbook peddler. How about that? My first real job. You remember those annoying fucks that would come around when you were a college professor giving out books and trying to get you.
I had quite a few of those books in my office.
Exactly, right? Hopefully you weren't one of those bad people that would sell the samples. But,
never.
It was happened all the time. Anyway, but the cool thing about it was, as I said later, a PhD a mile wide and an inch deep. At least my approach was soft sell. Mostly just talk to the prospect what they were interested in. So I, get 20, 30 minutes to chat with all these really interesting people across every discipline. We had books. It was a medium-sized independent textbook.
Yeah, that would be really interesting.
And it was actually amazingly interesting. And the big thing that came out of that, life trajectory-wise, about 1978, I started seeing these strange things on some professors' desks, mostly in engineering and science and math, and that was personal computers, the very earliest ones.
Wow.
And most of them were very, weird names that you've never heard of, like MITS and Altair and North Star Horizon and what have you. And they were semi-kits that these characters would build. When I was in college, I did take a course in computer programming. I did some programming to make money, writing atmospheric models for the geology department and Fortran and stuff. But I was not a lover of computers, because in those days it was the big glass house with the big IBM mainframes and punch cards and all that stuff. And it didn't really appeal to me that much. But the idea of having your own computer, holy shit. So in 1980, I plunked down about 90% of my net worth, $4,500, and bought a top of the line Apple II with a graphics capable dot matrix printer, dual floppies. Holy moly!
Of course, I actually had, my family had one of those, and I played the Olympics on there. I was actually really good at the Olympics on that model, because that would have been my 5th grade year, 1980. I would have been into that's actually when it. Yeah, that was. So anyway, there's our cool parallel lives.
Yeah, exactly. And
10 at the time.
Yeah, and I decided I was going to get into the technology industry, and so I checked around and. Got some job offers as VP of marketing for educational software companies. Good fit, know the markets and such, and knew enough about technology, be dangerous, etc. But I stumbled across in my research a company called The Source. In fact, I actually came upon their magazine in a computer store. In the old days, computer stores was where us PC nerds hung out to see what was happening.
Okay.
And they had a magazine, and The Source was the very first online consumer service. Literally, most of what we have on the web today, we had by 1981. Chat, email, news services, buying and selling stuff, bulletin boards, and even by late 81, one of the precursors of social media. So anyway, I wrote a crazy letter to the VP of sales and said, I got a plan to build a $4 billion business for you in the educational field. And I went back and looked at that letter later. I go, Jesus, what an audacious fuck I was. But he said, well, it sounds interesting. The next time,
$4 billion.
And I didn't realize at the time how tiny the source was. It was probably $10 million a year in revenue at that, right? And they said, if you ever get to DC, drop in. I'd love to chat with you. And it turns out my parents lived in DC, even though I was living in Kentucky at the time. I was heading up there for Thanksgiving, so I stopped in, chatted with them, and we really hit it off. And they offered me a job. And meantime, I had these other 3 job offers and an offer from the parent company of the publishing company I worked for to start a software division. But I had this, I walked around, as I do when I make a decision. I walked around the neighborhood where I live for about an hour. And as I always do, I say to myself, before I step foot on the front porch, I will make the decision. And I concluded that I loved the idea of the online world much more than I did software. And there was just something about it that attracted me. I can't even articulate any particularly good or logical reason. Just like this, I just smelled that this was
intuitive sense,
truly intuitive sense. And so I walked through the door, and it was very clear in my mind. I called the other 4 companies up and said no, and said yes to the source. Moved to Chicago, was a regional sales manager in Chicago. That was what they happened to have open. Being a pragmatic kind of guy I was, I'll just take any job. Fuck, right? And soon I was back at headquarters as the head of market research, and then ran software development for a while, and then ran product. Was the co-head of product marketing, and was involved in the very earliest building of the online world, which was really interesting.
I heard you mention that. That's really fascinating.
Really was one of the key forks in my life, which could have easily gone in a different direction.
Sure.
And unfortunately, the source was bought by the Reader's Digest like a week after I joined it, right? And people don't remember, Reader's Digest was a big deal.
There were total Reader's Digest all over our damn house.
It was a multi-billion-dollar company, one of the biggest, most profitable publishing companies in the world. That subsequently went bankrupt. Amazing. There was a series of bad investments, and the source could have been a contender, could have been the winner, right? Could have been the CompuServe of that era at least. But the Reader's Digest management, were they bad? So after 5 CEOs in 20 months, the last one who they actually sent down from Reader's Digest was totally intolerable. So after I spent an hour presenting my vision of the source, I concluded, this dude is seriously clueless. I'm out of this place. And so I hooked up with a guy I had met actually in the online world. And he and I went and started a company in Boston called Business Research Corporation. And our charter was to take the low-cost, high-performance technologies, which we pioneered at the source, which are like an order of magnitude less expensive than the mainframe technologies that people had typically been using, and to apply them into Wall Street and corporate America to build online information products. And we built a series of online information products that were some were interesting, and a couple of them were revolutionary. And in 1986, we sold that a bundle of 4 companies that were kind of interrelated to each other, and sold it to Thomson Corporation, these days Thomson Reuters. And it was one of the foundational pieces to their Thomson Financial Services division. And I stayed around for about 6 months, and then big company is not for me. I'm out of here. Off I went. Did another couple of startups, one of which was successful, one of which was kind of a draw, I would say. And then I kind of retired, quote unquote, and started thinking big thoughts, and then got sucked back into the business world after about 6 months with a 2-day consulting assignment, supposedly back to Thomson. They had a business unit that was being run by a friend of mine who had actually been at my startup. And he said, I got all kinds of technical problems, Jim. Could you come here and take a look? And so I said, shit, what the hell? For a ridiculous amount of money, I'll come in and give you a 2-day consulting stint. So he said yes. I said yes. I did it. Anyway, I ended up staying 6.5 years and ended up as the first CTO of Thomson for the whole $8 billion company, 50,000 employees. And in the meantime, on the way, I managed several businesses for them, et cetera. So anyway, that was very interesting. And, my role then became to drag this, at that time, mostly print publisher into the internet world. Huh. And we did it. And we went from number 4 in our category to number 1 over about a 10-year period. And I think we laid a very good foundation for that. And then, my last gig in business world was got recruited late in the day. And to my surprise, I really like Thomson. It was very good companies, family owned, very ethical, played the game hard, but honestly and fairly. Fair. But I got recruited away with a very interesting opportunity to run Network Solutions, who at the time ran the domain name system, ComNet, org,
all of that. Yeah. Okay.
All that shit. And the underlying infrastructure for everything else, right? All the country codes and all this stuff. And we had a nice abusive monopoly. It was
that sounds fairly central.
It was a very, and it was, I will say, much of the company was very fucked up. And famously so, the worst customer service imaginable, serious technical problems, a bunch of other problems. And people ask me, well, why the hell would you go to that fucked up mess? And I said, well, truthfully, I'd done one turnaround before, and fixing busted stuff in some ways is easier than creating new stuff. And think about the central position this thing has.
Yeah, no doubt about that, huh?
And so I went there and we fixed her up and sold it at the very top of the .com bubble. It was kind of ridiculous, I must say. And then I said, all right, enough's enough. I'm done with business. And I retired. And this has been the third time.
Was this like 98, 99-ish kind of deal?
2000.
2000. Well, that is okay, right at the top.
We literally penciled the deal March 10th, 2000. Go back and look at the curves. That is the bubble.
That is literally the day of the fucking top.
Literally the top. Within 48 hours.
Holy.
That was good. And so, anyway, I said, all right, I've retired twice before. The first time for 2 days, second time for 2 months. This time I'm going to find something that'll keep my
interest. Gotta go for at least 2 years.
Exactly. That's what I said, 2 years. So I inventoried my interests and I said, all right, the things I've been interested in, this evolutionary computation and complexity is something I found very interesting. I've been reading John Holland's work, Melanie Mitchell, Stuart Kaufman, et cetera. Yep. I went back and looked at my Amazon log, and that was kind of in the 96, 97, 98 time. I said, I'm going to become a researcher in this, goddammit. And so the day I retired, because I did have the golden handcuffs, or more like silver handcuffs, and so I had to stay almost a year at VeriSign, who had acquired us. And but come April 2001, I stepped down and walked down the April 2nd, walked down the hall to my lab, which I had built, and started writing evolutionary computing software to evolve neural nets. Evolutionary computing is a very cool field. And, it may have been from, being responsible for 5,000 programmers at Thomson and technologists, that wouldn't it be great if you could create software without programmers, right?
Talk about getting rid of the middleman.
Exactly. And so the idea of evolutionary computation is you set up ecosystems where randomly generated programs compete with each other. And of course, initially a randomly generated program is total garbage, but using some crossover and mutation and
variation, selection, and retention. That's the way to grow shit.
Exactly. And amazingly, at least if the domain is correct and if you get the representation correct, you can actually grow software through Darwinian competition. And I created an ecosystem around the Othello game to evolve game-playing agents using encoded neural nets, essentially. It was a hell of a lot of fun.
Is that what ultimately led to the good Go champions?
Eventually, and and my approach was not at all very different from AlphaGo Zero, in that I used the zero intelligence starting point, where I told it nothing but the rules. I did not have opening books. I did not have deep advanced searches or anything else. So it was at least conceptually on the same line that eventually led to AlphaGo Zero. And it was a lot of fun. And a guy I knew who was a reporter at the Times thought this was just very interesting. And he wrote a article in the Times. It was called something like "Internet CEO Does What" or something like that. And it was kind of a cool article. It was kind of fun, and came to the attention of the people at Sante Fe Institute.
Right.
And they called me.
I figured we were at this cusp.
Yeah, exactly. And they called me up and we had a good hour chat. And they said, how would you like to come out and visit? You sound like our kind of guy. And I said, well, sure, why not? So I went out and visited. We really hit it off. And for those people who don't know it, the Sante Fe Institute is an exceedingly interesting place. It's a research institute that's research only, does no contract work. It is not a think tank. And it's on par with the highest quality research places you've ever heard of, right? It's not very big. The total number of full-time resident faculty is about 8 or 9.
Yep.
Throw in another 15 or so postdocs, and that's basically it. But it also has a worldwide network of external faculty, over 100. And it's been amazingly influential. In a typical year, we'll publish 25 or 30 articles in Nature, Science, PNAS, other absolute top drawer journals, on par with, like, say, University of Wisconsin or something.
Yep.
Only a little less than, say, University of Michigan or something. So it's like really amazingly high impact research.
Totally. In fact, I this was in 2000, middle of 2001. I developed my UTOK manifesto, and I mailed that to Sante Fe randomly. Just, I had nothing about marketing. I basically have a learning disability when it comes to marketing. But I was like, oh, hey, those guys are doing super cool stuff. Here, I'll just randomly send them this shit. Of course, I never heard anything back. But anyway, it's a connection I have to Sante Fe.
All right. You should come out one day. We'll have you give me a
Right. Things have evolved.
Things have evolved, right? And I will say, over the transom, crazy ass shit comes into SFI all the time.
Yeah, I would imagine.
And truthfully, we have no method to process it. So it probably just went right into the circular file. And so anyway, I went back out there again after a couple months, and they said, hey, how should I come out and be a researcher? And I go, shit, it's kind of like, it's frankly, it's like inviting a barefoot friar from Guatemala to go to the Vatican. But, if you ask, for various family reasons, it made sense for us to do it. So my wife and daughter and I moved out to Sante Fe in 2002, and I became a researcher at the Sante Fe Institute. Wow. It was literally, that's what I did, right? I was fairly junior researcher. And
evolutionary computational stuff. Did you have a specific area? I mean, that's a very interdisciplinary domain. But
I did lots of stuff. I did evolutionary AI. I did a fair amount of work on price formation in financial markets. I did some consulting and advising on projects around climate change and alternative energy. And I'm sort of a resource for people who wanted real world perspectives on things, because these people are really, really smart, but they live in a very, very ivory tower. And so I was a useful input where people wanted grounding in reality. Gave a little advice on some of the work on scaling laws in cities and companies. But, I didn't do it. I was not a major contributor there, but I was a sounding board for people that wanted to say, all right, how do these ideas from biology, how does this resonate with you if we try to apply them to companies and cities? And I go, yes, no. So
gotcha.
played as So anyway, it was very, very interesting. Then in retrospect, I don't know if I should have, but I did. I allowed them to talk me into getting involved more on the governance side than on the science side, and ended up on the board of trustees, and then vice chairman, then chairman, and help shepherd the place forward. And that's fulfilling in its own way as well. And I was there 10 years. And then for family reasons, again, we decided to move back to Virginia. In 2012, I stepped down as chairman, moved back to Virginia, and
that's where you got the place, outside Stanton, right?
Yeah, well, actually, we have a place in Stanton, and then we have a farm about an hour to the west, deep in the mountains, deep in Appalachia. In fact, in the one of the most remote places in the eastern United States. Our nearest neighbor is a mile away. The whole population of the county is 2,200 people or so. So. A very good place to have ridden out the COVID pandemic.
Yes, we're really well isolated out there.
Yeah. So anyway, that's that's sort of the backbone of it. And when I got back, started thinking about, okay, how can I apply this complexity thinking to real world problems? And I got connected up with some other interesting folks, and we created this Game B thing.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely what I hope we would transition to in terms of that. And was it the grounding at the Sante Fe Institute that really seeded your perspective and connections in this regard, or was it? I wasn't sure about that transition.
Yeah, certainly. I would say the lens of complexity was one of the most important seeds for me. And also at the Sante Fe Institute, I met my most important collaborator in this project, Jordan Hall.
I just talked to, and I'm talking to tomorrow. So now I'm networked with Mr. Hall.
Jordan and I have been working together closely, mostly, but independently as well on this stuff since 2008, actually, when we met at the Sante Fe Institute, where he was a new young trustee, and he and I had this most amazing 4 or 5 hour conversation after a board meeting, and we just said, "Damn, we think about the world peculiarly, but similarly." And we remained in contact. And then in 2012, I sent him a 60-page paper I wrote on, various things. And he said, "Wow, this is interesting. Let me rope in some people I know." And so he brought in Brett Weinstein and some other folks, and I brought in some people I knew. And for long, we had a dozen people working on ideas that eventually in 2013 morphed into Game B.
Right.
And sort of
you guys had a series of conferences, right?
Yeah,
basically
we had
right here, right down the road from me. Yep.
Yeah, the famous 5 Stanton meetings. And the group kept getting bigger and bigger. I think Stanton 5 actually had 35 people in attendance. And by that time, there were about 65 people in the overall effort. Yep. And, and the basic thesis was Game A, the alternative to the current status quo, while having been very successful in many ways over the last 300 years in doing miraculous things, also has some fundamental, deep problems that will lead us to crash as a society if we don't address deep fundamentals. We're not talking about superficial changes here. And I would say everything that we talked about since then has only gotten more obvious and more clear.
Seems like things are heating up, Jim.
Yeah, when we were talking about, quite literally, right? When we were talking about this in 2013, frankly, most people thought we were nuts, right? Many less people think we're nuts today. And
I mean, I would not thought you were nuts, but I wasn't on. At 2013, I was not aware of global civilization collapse as a, hey, that's in the potential forecast. And now, obviously, as my family knows, it's sort of like, hey,
it's easy to become a crank on this stuff. Yeah. And so I will say we were there. We came up with universal basic income long before the term was floated around. We call it the citizenship wage. We'd identified problems with our monetary system and finance. We had identified problems with our governance structure, particularly the capture of politics by money. We had a whole lot of diagnostics, and we're beginning to work on, all right, what is a real outside the box thinking, and that work has been continuing. And we had a little bit of a fracture in 2014, but then we came back together in 2017, 2018, and the Game B movement has been gaining momentum since. And I will say it's kind of frustrating, and there is not a doctrine available anywhere. There's dozens of thinkers, people like Daniel Schmachtenberg and Forrest Landry, Jordan Hall, of course, Brett Weinstein. Some people I would call at least Game B adjacent who've been in and out of the movement, people like Nora Bateson and Benita Roy and many others. And so it's been been really fun to explore with other smart people, this deep thinking and sort of where we're at now. And I think there's a fair amount of agreement on this vision is that human society has entered into what we call the metacrisis, which is, it's not just one thing, global warming. Yeah, global warming, not a good thing. Very bad, in fact. And if none of these other problems get us, global warming may well. But there are other ones, the species extinction events that are going on, the rise of authoritarianism, the rise of economic inequality, whatever it is that's breaking down our ability for collective sense making. I mean, the crazy ass shit. That runs around and that has 42% popularity, right? This anti-vax stuff. What the fuck, right?
It's bad, Jim.
It's like nothing I can recall. My wife and I talked about this for a bit. We recall when we were young kids, like 8 or 9, the Sabin oral polio vaccine came out. Polio was a really bad epidemic, and tens of thousands of kids were crippled, and fair numbers died every year from this really horrible disease. And then this very effective oral vaccine came along, and the government decided we're just going to give it to everybody for free. And we lined up at the local junior high school, everybody. And you got the stuff on a sugar pill, and you took it, and that was that. Nobody complained about it. No, everyone knew it was your moral obligation to participate, right?
It was like there was faith in the institutions back then.
Yeah, exactly. And now, I mean, God damn, it's just crazy ass shit. It's like there is no way to have good collective sense making anymore about really important things. I mean, in some sense, we were lucky with COVID. It's bad, but it could have been a lot worse. Imagine if it had the same transmissibility factor, but had a death rate of 25%, right?
Obviously, yeah, no.
And things like MERS, which is a fairly close relative, had a death rate of 50%. So imagining a COVID thing of that level of transmissibility with a 25% death rate could easily happen and probably will at some time in the future. And if we have such broken sense making as was shown across the whole West, basically, it'd be a fucking shit show.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not the only example of broken sense making.
We totally have broken sense making. And we absolutely need to somehow figure out a way to upgrade our schematics so we can actually coordinate ourselves for collective intelligence decision making. And that's the Game B world, and indeed you're working on it. Is it? Do I have it right that maybe there's some opportunities for some future evolution in the Game B, and you're working on a Game B manuscript? Is that correct, or something along those lines?
Yeah, I am. I have since April 1st. I've been working on what I call the Game B book project.
Okay.
I started with a very, very deep outline, and then July 1st. I started, I basically cut back on my podcasting from like 10 a month to 2 episodes a month.
Okay.
And
love the Jim Rutt podcast, by the way. Let's make a plug for it nonetheless.
Yeah, the Jim Rutt Show. And speaking of plugs, I also
put me on the map.
Yeah, exactly. It was great. It was wonderful. I think we had you on twice, didn't we? I think
you did. After our conversation, we came back and plugged the fifth joint point as a framing for this transition for what we're going through.
Exactly. Right. And so, since July 1st, I've been doing in-depth interviews with many of the Game B thinkers, the ones I mentioned, plus a bunch of other ones who are doing really interesting work in various niches like education and parenting and things of that ilk. And I continue to populate the outline and add some content, et cetera. And this is really going to be interesting. It's going to be very important, though, and I'm framing this in the introduction, that while this will be the first comprehensive look at Game B, it must not be taken as catechism. In fact, I think I'll probably put in the introduction, something rather Ruttian like, if I hear anybody quoting this book as catechism, I'm going to kick their ass, right? And make the point that we are not utopians. We don't think we have all the answers. This is an evolutionary unfolding and exploration of a new social operating system for humanity, or at least for Western civilization. But we must do so by taking our starting theory, putting it into practice, learning, and then adjusting our theory and doing it in a continuous cycle. And that always be very skeptical. Anybody who tells you they have the answer in their book.
Amen to that.
And this book will be very, very emphatic about the fact that Game B, by its very nature, has got to be exploratory, adaptive, and heading towards what I call metastability. We don't believe, while we have to become more stable than we are, we don't believe stability is reasonable either. You end up with, like China in 1471, where they burned all the sailing ships and turned inward and ended up getting conquered by the Manchus and then later the Europeans. You can't turn inward. You can't stop. You can't go back. You have to go forward. We have to go forward in a way that understands the carrying capacity of the earth. It goes forward understanding what does collective sense making really mean, and how should it work in such a way that it's compatible with human nature? Because humans are not super intelligences, right? In fact, I love to say that humans are, to the first order, the stupidest possible general intelligence.
We just climb into general intelligence barely.
I mean, it makes sense. We're evolution. We're evolutionary creatures. Ma nature seldom profligate with her gifts. And as you know, as a psychologist, there's whole kinds of deep limitations in human cognition. Probably the most famous is our working memory size, 5 plus or minus, or 7 plus or minus 2. It's really more like 5.
Actually, they shrunk it. We're down to 5 pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. And that has gigantic implications. That, for instance, the fact that we can't actually understand a book. Right. What we're doing is looking at 5 words at a time and then 5 concepts.
We grab a hold of the gist and then justify accordingly.
Exactly. Right. And we're not that smart. And we get a little smarter when we have external things like reading and writing and computers and adding machines and abacuses and things like that. But we're still just barely generally intelligent. We've been able to do amazing things, particularly as we develop these externalizations of our cognition. But to think that we, a single human, is able to, let's say, make sense of the modern network world with all these messages bombarding us, 40, 50,000 messages a month, and be able to vet them and validate them and make sense and come to some solid conclusions, which is wrong. We just don't have the right architectures in place around us, and nor do we have the cooperative and collaborative efforts that we should all each be embedded in a cell of collective sense making. Where together we can sort this stuff out. But on our own, the way the world has been driving towards hyper individualism, it's a shit show. It's why people believe ridiculous bullshit, right? And so anyway, So what's your sense about kind of where the movement is? Do you have an optimistic, a pessimistic, both forecasts for kind of how we're evolving? What's most exciting about what you're seeing on the edge of this? Yeah, very, very optimistic. The Game B cloud of people is continually growing. We have 5,000 people, members of our online services. If you want to find the others, as we say, 2 places you can do it. The one I'd recommend is our private network, game-b.org. Now it's currently not, you have to apply for membership in a little three question form. So just say, Jim Rutt told me, right? Would they let me in, Jim? Can I get into that? Yeah, or just say that asshole Jim Rutt, right? Right, well, that should be the code handshake. That's it. If you put that in there, where did you hear about it? The screeners will know that you have the real deal and will let you in. You heard it here, folks. Yeah, that asshole Jim Rutt, game-b.org. There's also a Facebook group, Game B group on Facebook. It's actually still fairly active, but I would say the real thinking and the best interactions are on our private group, and so it continues to grow. The ears to hear are growing every day. COVID certainly helped. COVID was a wake-up call to people. There's something seriously wrong with our society. You see the grotesque incompetence of essentially every country in the West. Just had to underline the things we've been saying all along, that we do not have the wisdom to go with our power. And so I'm very positive about that. I also really love the turn that's being taken in the Game B world right now. And that is, we've come to the conclusion that we have a lot of good theory, but we have to start putting it into practice and trying it out. And so so-called Proto-Bs, on-the-ground communities, people, around 150 people, maybe 300. Jordan Hall calls Civium, very similar concepts. They're really the same concepts. Civium is a flavor of Proto-B, essentially. Right. Well, we got a variation, selection, retention on the Proto-B processes. And that's hugely relevant to how we see Game B unfolding. So 2 have already bought their land and are beginning to build their communities. A third is about to make an offer. A fourth is looking for land in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Ooh, hey, that's exciting for us. and I would expect there to be maybe five additional ones next year. We have a thing called the Proto-B incubator, where you have people who are working on the earliest stages of planning, thinking through how to do the financing, how to do sewage. From one extreme financing, the other extreme sewage, right? Yeah, and then really importantly, how do we govern ourselves in an emergent, network-based, non-hierarchical, non-command and control fashion? That's the question I'm most interested in. So I think that the Game B movement will become much more interesting and more persuasive when we have on-the-ground examples that actually work. I mean, the real world tends to be more complicated than our theories about the real world. And we will find that some of our theories are just fucking wrong, guys, right? And that's fine. Again, I think that one of the core things of Game B is do not fall in love with your theory. Your theory is a lens to look at reality, but reality bats last, people. So I'm looking very much
I haven't heard you say that before. I like that.
Yeah, it's. I think it's really, really important. And then next year, I'm going to put some of my own efforts into what we call Game B Ventures. And there are some who are labeling themselves Game B Ventures already. But I think we'll get a little bit more formal in what that means and encourage businesses, mostly in employee-owned cooperative structures, using the new laws available probably in Colorado, which you can apply in any state in the union for so-called hybrid collaboratives, which are more investor-friendly. And can we build ventures that model Game B ways of approaching the world and yet are also highly efficacious at outcompeting Game A at its own?
Well, you have to be able to do that, right?
Yeah, and that's very important. We're not we're not hippies in mud huts here, right? We know that we have to be able to outcompete Game A, at least in some niches. That's the thing about species, niche selection, niche construction, and be able to literally pump resources from Game A into building out Game B. And so, if we get 2 or 3 Proto-B started this year, 5 next year, 25 the year after that, 100, 500, 5,000, off we go.
All of a sudden, you got exponential growth curves. That can work pretty well.
You get R greater than 1, and and some of them will fail. It's probably some of them will turn bad. I don't doubt some of them will be captured by sex cult leaders and crazy shit like that. That's okay. We understand that. We won't be surprised by it. But we will learn. We already defined the fact that Proto-Bs have to always be in horizontal communication with each other, sharing best practices, creating things we call X in a box. How do you solve sewage in a off the grid community or or just barely on the grid community? Does it make and in what climates does it make sense to have open field agriculture versus greenhouse agriculture? Is liquid democracy a reasonable way to do governance, or is there some better way? What about sociocracy? Is that an interesting small group self-organizing in governance systems? One of the Proto-Bs has committed to using sociocracy as its governance toolkit. Does that work? If so, to what degree? Right. So there's a shitload of tangible, practical questions that need to be answered. And the only way you can answer them is by doing it. So I'm very excited by this turn to the doing while we continue to move the theory forward.
Wonderful. Are you, in terms of this book, can you give us a little bit more specificity about what you envision putting in there? And is it delineating this shift to the practicum and the setting up Proto-Bs? Is it consolidating the vision according to Jim Rutt? Well, with the caveats, is it trying to consolidate the kind of the movement identity? Is it all that?
Yeah. This is a bit of the challenge. It's all the above, and also explaining a little bit about the history of how we got to where we are. Okay. And but I've also given myself a constraint, and I was just talking to another successful author this morning about this. I have set myself a series of parameters that make stuffing all this into the book really hard. I've decided the book should be 85,000 words, which is about 275 pages of trade paperback size, plus appendices and glossary, but 85,000 words, and it has to be written for a bookish 15-year-old.
Oh, geez.
And the key takeaway from bookish 15-year-old is they can read, a sentence that includes a semicolon, but they're unlikely to have a lot of domain knowledge. So assume no knowledge. Do not assume that they know about the shit show that was July 1914. People like you and I, we can just refer to the fucked up mess of 1914. Sure. And we can assume that we both have reasonable knowledge of what that was all about. But with a 15-year-old, they won't. And so if I'm going to refer to 1914, I'm going to have to explain it. And so puts even a bigger load on my 85,000 words.
That's going to be, you have to hone your prose there.
In fact, I've been intentionally reading very terse but excellent writers like Hemingway.
Hemingway comes to mind,
Cormac McCarthy, at least many of his books are written that way. And one of my current faves, Peter Heller, who's a novelist who's writing right now. The Dog Stars is an amazing book. The River is another amazing book. His newest one, The Guide, is another amazing book. And they're very Hemingway-esque, so terse. but he brings a tremendous amount into a small number of words.
Totally.
And of course, I'm going to have to just leave a lot of my favorite little things out, right? I probably won't be able to tell the tale of 2013, 2014, and the 5 Stanton meetings. I might allude to it and point people to the very excellent Rebel Wisdom video.
Yes, that's
on that, for instance. So I'll be making a lot of those kind of editorial decisions, what to leave in, what to leave out, and what to point people towards to get this story across in a digestible and accessible fashion for that bookish 15-year-old.
All right. That sounds great. That sounds, in terms of sort of either the content or just the live connections that you're making right now, what are, in addition to the Proto-B communities, are there ideas that you see that are sort of on the cutting edge that inform the evolution? Because I know when it did come together, there were some tough spots in terms of the original Game B. And my understanding was there's some folks that were focused on society systems, sort of top-down stuff, some others in terms of sort of development of the self and those kinds of issues.
There's a great question, because that was indeed what caused the big crack up, which was basically 2 factions. One who said we have to build institutions first, right? Not necessarily top down. It could be bottom up. But the institutional focus,
the social systemic institutional people.
Yeah, the literal social operating system.
Yep.
And then there was we can't build good institutions until we have significant personal change. And
it's like a battle between psychologists and sociologists.
Yeah, very similar, right? In fact, you could call it that. And it got ugly. And I don't know, I'm not quite sure why. Of course,
sociologists and psychologists never talk to each other. So maybe that's why.
And that may be why. And so we eventually just said, fuck this. We don't need to be fighting with each other all the time. And we made a decision that we said, put Game B into spore mode. Okay, we've all learned a lot. Spores go out into the world, do your thing. And then by chance, the spores refruited and got going again. And I think the thing that's allowed it to be so much more generative this time is that we all learn that it's so hilarious. Nature versus nurture, the answer is always both. And I would say my synthesis, and I think this is shared by a lot of people, I wouldn't claim everybody, is that it's a very interesting coevolution between personal change and social institutional development. And that I do think that the personal change people were right, that we have to increase human capacity to create the kinds of institutions that we want. But I think the institution people were right also, that the right kinds of institutions scaffold our ability to change. Again, to this point that as isolated individualistic islands, our ability to maintain good behavior and generative ways of living is really difficult. You're constantly bombarded by radio and TV and Facebook and Twitter and your friends with their shiny BMWs and all that stuff. It's really hard to resist all those temptations. Well, if you have a community and a social system which reinforces, reinforces and stimulates and supports, scaffolds good, righteous behavior, the two co-evolve. And as people get more capable, what we call sovereignty and capacity, then the ability to build interesting and new and even unforeseen forms of social operating system gets stronger and stronger.
Totally. Love it.
And I think this is really important. And you mentioned, I think it's in our pre-show, some of our adjacent neighbors in radical social change space. Metamodernism is one of those, right? And they make a similar distinction that we have to work on ourselves so that we can create better ways of living together cooperatively and socially. And the two are intimately interwoven. And I love the concept of coevolution as a way to think about this. Was actually it's a key concept in evolutionary computing as well as in evolutionary theory from the biological world. And so that's, I think, one of the points I'm going to really try to get across, that that we have to be working on both all the time, and it's not an neither or kind of thing.
Totally love that, and I totally agree that I love the meta-modern space. I mean, for me, I was just pretty much working on my own inside of the academy at the level of psychology, psychotherapy, and then got bumped out basically I got attacked a little bit by wokeism, and then there were other stuff that was going on. And then voila, I found myself in this space: intellectual dark deep web, rebel wisdom, Stoa, Game B, metamodern. It's just amazing, super fascinating in relationship to that. And then to see the Game B articulation and its metamodern, and have that ideology, both in relationship to, hey, the danger, the beauty of the past, the danger of the past. And then this, how are we going to cultivate self and society and proper relations so that we evolve to a meta-sustainable rather than the meta-crisis structure, which is so fascinating to see that zeitgeist emerge, across many different domains, and to feel myself pulled into it, but not be connected. And then all of a sudden sort of wake up to a landscape of people that are, involved in a similar kind of evolution and network with them. For me, it's been a really, really wonderful couple of years in that regard.
And it is amazing. I mean, there are lots now of people that are on similar missions, and we're now starting to talk to each other. I was on a conference over the weekend where 100 people showed up from various change organizations of various sorts. We have another little project called the Big Change Coalition, where at this point we've limited it to just 10 or so we can get to know each other well. But our goal is to grow it eventually, because we are not doctrinaire. There's lots of room to collaborate and for people to go in different directions. I'll give another example. I posted a call on the Game B home website, the Game B-org website yesterday, to somebody reach out to me who's running a solar punk summit in Austin in October. And she's well aware of Game B and has actually participated. We've all thought of solar punk as one of our adjacent, we have some agreements with them and some disagreements, but enough agreements that we consider ourselves co-travelers. And she, requested that we put together a group of people to be on a panel at the solar punk summit. And I said, a great opportunity. So I put the call out and said, anyone who lives in or around Austin, Texas, and if you're available in October, reach out and talk to Angel and see if you guys can come to an agreement on when you could do this panel discussion to let the broader solar punk people know a little bit more about Game B.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's what really feels like there is, gave me hope, is that I'm seeing a weave of network of people that are pulled into the zeitgeist. And now there's enough of a space so that if it reaches enough connectivity, then all of a sudden it will become a centering hub. And I'm feeling that weave emerge. And so that's definitely exciting.
Yeah, and we're all in favor of that. We think that as long as we're all on similar journeys, a concept I've tried to popularize, I call coherent pluralism.
Yep.
Which is have a small coherent core of things that we see in the Big Change Coalition. We actually created a statement of 6 statements that we all agreed with, amazingly, and they said, but outside that. If you want some people want to, emphasize economics. Some want to emphasize, family. Some want to emphasize education. Some want to emphasize collaborative entrepreneurhood. Great, right?
Totally.
The world of the alternative operating system is so huge. There's no limit for any time soon on the work that needs to be done. And so different groups with different interests and different priorities ought to work and ought to encourage horizontal communications.
Absolutely.
This is how we can all learn from each other and gradually and non-dogmatically work towards a new and glorious future for humanity. And that's important. Sometimes the meta-crisis looks so dark, right? People can get into a tailspin about this. And I'd like to say, there is a way forward, right? There is a way forward. There will be a way forward.
I'm more optimistic than pessimistic, although I feel some of the darkness, definitely.
And yes, and we should be prepared for the darkness. And in the darkness, there may be some opportunities too, right?
Absolutely.
In fact, in the book, I focus mostly on what I call the long road to Game B, which is assuming we can get there without a social cataclysm. And it might take 80 years. That's my guess. On the other hand, I will have a section, a couple of 2 or 3 chapters on the short road to Game B. What happens if the shit does hit the fan? How can Game B move forward rapidly and help catch society?
Help some of the collapsing society.
Yeah. And hopefully it won't come to that. But I think we need to be maintaining psychological equilibrium in this tension between this glorious future, the long road to Game B, no collapse, and the possibility that we might have to confront collapse and be psychologically prepared and operationally prepared to deal with that contingency should it happen.
Love it.
I think
that's exactly the kind of framing flexibility, breadth and depth across the wide variety of systems that's crucial.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. One thing I should definitely talk about, I know would be interest to you, particularly with your clinical psychological background, is one of the key things that we call out in the Game B thinking is Psychotechnologies. I think we actually took the name from John Vervaeke.
That's where I've certainly first heard it. but I'm loving that it's populating.
Yeah, and I think Jordan Hall is the one who brought it into Game B. Right now, I am plowing my way through Vervaeke's 50 episodes, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. I did episode 45 yesterday.
All right. You're making it then.
I'm going to have Johnny V on my podcast for 3 episodes in October. And we're going to work through his book I mean, not his book, but his video series in considerable detail. And so anyway, Psychotechnologies is something that has caught our attention, and we have cooked it into the Game B thing, particularly around the Proto-Bs, that we would expect each Proto-B to choose for itself using a concept that Jordan created called meta psychotechnologies, which John has picked up now and uses and credits Jordan as the originator of, which is to say, all right, what subset of the psychotechnologies on offer or available ought we to emphasize within our Proto-B? And psychotechnologies can include things from meditation to traditional medical psychotherapy, to psychedelics, to breath work, to being in the flow state, to
completely.
To dance, to martial arts. These are all psychotechnologies which help mold us as our human capacity and sovereignty. And I do expect that the Proto-Bs will differ significantly. Some will be interested in quiet introspection. Some will be more for ecstasis and dance and song and martial arts and flow states and extreme sports and things of that sort. And that's good. And then the psychotechnologies that each Proto-B chooses will coevolutionarily upgrade the capacity for the individual, but in different ways, right? Totally. And then that will mean that different institutions will arise within those Proto-Bs, and we'll be able to see, and there'll be some learnings on what works, what doesn't. And what I suspect we'll find is there are multiple ways that work. I would imagine. And if we can keep centered on the concept of coherent pluralism and say that is a good thing. These are not. These are not heretics that need to be stamped out. These are fellow travelers who found yet another way forward, which is so exciting to me.
No, I mean, all of this is just the synergy here is really unbelievable. So just to give some listeners some ideas. So when I wrote my book, 2011, I called it a postmodern grand meta narrative. Okay. In other words, a meta modern framing that affords a particular, and then I framed it as an integrated pluralism, coherent pluralism. In other words, the dialectic at the one level of a center that then can be viewed from a wide variety of different perspectives, and cultivating a dialectic between integration, and that then translates into a coherent center, coherent pluralism around it in relation, and affording that dialectic is exactly. And then the other thing that the unified theories, psychology is all fucked up, as you know, Jim, in relationship to a discipline. And so then the bridge between our scientific understanding of psychology at the animal level, at the human level, and then the translation of that into therapeutics. And the UTOK structure is the bridging between a science of psychology that gives rise to the psychotherapeutic technologies that afford us ways to orient towards well-being and wisdom and fulfillment, as opposed to neurotic immaturity and struggle and a felt sense of entanglement with life in a way that leaves you bitter and unfulfilled.
Absolutely. And I will say Vervaeke has really opened my eyes a fair bit to that as well. So I think that and again, this is what I find so exciting. There's people like Vervaeke, people like yourself, who come from the discipline of psychology. Although Vervaeke is interesting. He's both a philosopher and a cognitive scientist. And so,
right. Well, it's a really interesting. This is all part from me embedded in psychology. A lot of that is just because psychology is so fucked up. We gave rise to cognitive science.
Exactly.
People were like, I'm basically done with you losers and behaviorism and whatever the hell happened there. And then artificial intelligence.
All this kind of bogus.
It's like, hey, we have information science and theory now emerging. We have artificial models and we have better cybernetics. So fuck you guys. We're just going to do cognitive science. It's
exactly.
Like, okay, but we just broke off now a whole nother chunk of confusion at one level. But anyway, obviously, and John and I mean, this is one of the other things been super from a meta theory perspective, a meta psychology perspective. John, me, and Zach Stein are doing a meta psychology on transformation. There's the transformation aspect that says, okay, what's human nature from our various perspectives as an educational developmental psychologist, and Zach, me as a clinical therapeutic and theoretical psychologist, John, cognitive science and philosophy. And the synergy of the meta psych perspective now, but that's emerging is super exciting, both in relationship to its connection to science and connection to humanistic value-based living. So and this is one of the things, I don't know if you have this sense, well, I have this sense very strongly for the hopefulness, and I'd like to get your take, is that there's an opportunity here for sort of a new enlightenment, and Enlightenment 2.0.
Absolutely. I love that terminology, and I use it myself. In some quarters, the Enlightenment somehow has come into bad repute, and
you got the postmodern critique of it, which I know you're a huge fan.
Fuck them people, right? As I said now, but again, I'm famous for saying fuck them people. But let's be honest, Game A needed a serious and deep critique, and 100%. When postmodernism restricted itself to critique, it was a hugely valuable movement, right? And even those unreadable French postmodernists created some very interesting tools that are quite useful. But when people then started to take postmodernism and thought it was the basis for a way forward, that's when it went to hell.
That is a fundamental difference between a sophisticated critique and shifting it to a constructive argument that the way we ought to live, which then becomes an unbelievable performative contradiction and crazy totalitarian speak.
Exactly. So there's a little bit nuanced version of my fuck them people, right? But nonetheless, fuck them people, at least when it comes to the road.
I'll offer the nuanced interpretation, but as I appreciate the straightforward, let's go with the Jim Rutt view. That's why we're here on the podcast.
I got a question for you. Yep. As you know, I read very widely and follow various threads that turn up. From various threads, I'm reading right now an interesting, somewhat peculiar book called "The Master and His Emissary" by Ian McGilchrist.
Sure, absolutely, 100%. Mm-hmm.
I'm probably 50 pages in. As far as I can tell, his thesis is that the differences between the hemispheres of the human brain, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, are quite substantial.
Yep.
And of course, he is very careful to distance himself from the pop psychology, right?
Hey, it's language and feeling, I thought.
Or male and female.
Or even worse.
And he's very, very careful to distance himself. But he goes into the research great depth. And he's foreshadowed, though he hasn't yet delivered, that he believes that there are very big differences, including worldviews and things of that sort, and even how we pay attention. And that his argument is going to be that Game A essentially has overemphasized left brain at the expense of right brain. Yep. And that is one of the generator functions, as we'd say in Game B speak, to the metacrises. I
can give you a snapshot on that analysis if you want. I am your theory guy after all.
Let her rip. I figured that you would be familiar with McGilchrist. And I will say the book is nicely written so far, and I would encourage anyone who's interested in this kind of stuff that it's not a hard read. It's written for a smart general audience. So anyway, what's your take on McGilchrist and his ideas?
Totally. So the basic idea that you want a system that orients towards the figure and specificity and to be able to then grasp something, which is then becomes the basic animalistic structure of the left brain relative to a gestalt generalized gripping of the animal environment relation that both alerts you to potential danger and affords a much more broad participatory grip of the agent arena relationship is pretty valid. And then the thing that really gets honed in on it is that if you're going to engage in propositional language, the propositional language acquisition device has got to tag the specificity, the figures that come off the ground, and generate a symbolic syntactical structure. So then you get, in us as humans, you do get the yoking of the propositional figure that specifies what it is that we are talking about with factual assertion and gets pissed off if it's challenged in a justificatory way, versus a much more perspectival, participatory, intuitive gripping of the holistic structure of the relationship of the animal and the environment. There are good reasons to believe that that is a pretty good way to describe the relative specializations of the hemispheres. Okay. Then what you can then argue, I think, with a high degree of, obviously broads, but what happens with the fucking scientific, modern empirical natural scientific evolution in enterprise? You can certainly argue that, well, we used to have, and they had their problems and everything else, but if we go back to the oral indigenous phase, the embodiment in relation and conversation, I'll use John's terms here, the procedural, perspectival and participatory modes of knowing relative to then basic rationalizations about what the hell might be happening in the world was much more entangled and embodied, enacted, in naturalized. And then we move into traditional cities where you actually have to build then regulatory structures of justification to manage the institutions. You get refined narratives about the way the world works. We're now moving into sort of being coordinated by refined knowledge systems. But you could argue, I think, that the ways in which some of the religions do that are more potentially embodied. What you see within the Western natural scientific move, the René Descartes move, that you can achieve retrieve knowledge through, logical, mathematical, deductive analysis, and a whole host of other things. And then the power of both science and technology, the technology rising us above nature, and then the propositional knowledge analysis and the power that generated, then creates an imbalance in relationship to what it is that we value, how we think of what truth is, how we think about what knowledge is. And we get a propositional, specific, analytic articulation of truth. So we get a left hemisphere over right hemisphere in balance. If we put it in John Vervaeke's language, it's the propositional specificity domain that then becomes the key truth analysis versus our perspectival, participatory, procedural knowing. And if we want sort of whole humans that are not just analytically, propositionally specific in the way they justify, but also embody perspectival, enacting human beings in a complicated relation, we actually want the whole package there in relation. And so that's part of the move to shift from a specific propositional left hemisphere, quasi-male dominated, because there is an analytic, instrumental aspect of the male energy that comes off of there, versus a more holistic embodied, and reaching to some things like transcendence, even psychedelic exploration, to achieve not propositional knowledge about the self-world relation, but perspectival, participatory knowledge of an intuition about what's gripping oneself in relationship to the world, that sense of being in the world that's not propositional. So that's a brief summary.
That's great, because it sounds like it does touch Vervaeke in a lot of places. I noticed after I ran into McGilchrist, I was curious if Vervaeke and McGilchrist had ever spoken. And it turns out there's a Rebel Wisdom video of the two of them.
There is indeed. And that is how they sync up. They recognize the left hemisphere. I mean, he's emphasizing the right hemisphere has some linguistic, and that's part of the old. And McGilchrist is trying to bring us out of that because he's identifying really the animalistic figure versus ground differentiation of the left hemisphere specificity. And by the way, why are we right-handed? Because you have to pick up certain kinds of things. So you have to hone in on, my right hemisphere sees this fucking cup and what it affords me. My left hemisphere, right hand, my right hemisphere, left hand, my shield is sort of where am I in the gestalt of the room. And there are good reasons why you'd want opponent processes between specific precision, that kind of thing, and gestalt gripping. There'd be good reasons why you'd want good opponent process along those lines.
Yeah, it sounds great. I'm looking forward to finishing, I said about 40 pages in, look forward to reading it, because it sounds like it stitches together, various things that I'm currently interested in.
And that's a super exciting time where we couldn't find the problem of psychology, as I highlight, is a great historical analysis of our fucking inability to stitch shit together. We just didn't have the tools, the technologies, the mindset, what came off of Enlightenment 1.0 was great for classical mechanics into quantum mechanics and general relativity, up into chemistry. Then we get Darwinian shit, and then we can trail the molecular biological line, and we blend into animals and neuroscience, and then all of a sudden it goes to fucking hell at the level of conceptual clarity. And then we're now able to pick up that baton and start an integrated pluralistic stitching to afford us both coherence in relationship to what we are saying from a complex, dynamic, adaptive system way, and even bridge into real, genuine, practical guidance for living, so we can actually look to our knowledge systems to afford us ways for fulfillment, which a lot of the early science shit, like John Watson's crap, for example, leads us into a shit show of stupidity in the way we actually treat humans.
Yeah, it's amazing. And of course, as you know better than most, unfortunately, a lot of this lack of such integration comes from the incentives and structures of university-based research and higher education.
You're at the cutting edge, so you create an institutional system that rewards the cutting edge. And if you don't have a big picture view, you have to slice, to use John's term, you have to spectralize a particular piece. You got to get specialty in there. Then we create all this fucking knowledge. Then you hone in on the specialty. And we want people on the cutting edge. But yeah, it gutted the big picture view and then couldn't provide any genuine structure for advance. They tried in the 1920s, but it gets blown to shit. And then we have this fragmented empirical pluralism that really has no goddamn coherence at the center. It's a nightmare.
Yeah, in fact, the kind of the pop saying is, "What's a PhD? It's someone who knows more and more about less and less until they know absolutely everything about absolutely nothing." Right? Totally. It's a little unfair because the reductionist science is indispensable, right?
Totally.
But this is the big but, and this is what the Sante Fe Institute's always been about, is let us take the learnings from reductionist science, the details, and look at them in the bigger picture. How do they relate to each other? When I describe complexity science for people in short, I say reductionist science is the study of the dancer, while complexity is the study of the dance.
Nice. Okay.
And I think, and you got to study both. And in fact, we argue at Sante Fe Institute, and I think you probably agree, that society has way overshot in terms of its allocation of resources to reductionist science at the expense of integration, holistic, and cross-disciplinary, integrated views of the sort that you do and of the sort that we do at the Sante Fe Institute.
No, it's been a real problem. They're really, the old paradigm and put people in sort of charge of the best of our knowledge because they could delineate the reductive line. And they're like, oh, well, that's the hard no shit. It's actually, no, that's one aspect of the hard no shit that is crucial, but it is not, you're not clapping with both hands if you just do reductive physicalism by any fucking stretch and think that you can deduce and reduce truth to the bottom layer of whatever. Where are you going to end up? Quantum field theory? I mean, it's fucking absurd. You have to complement that with a holistic, complexified, dynamic operating view. And if you do, I think that affords much more a metaphysical being from science that is much more enriching for our everyday lives. That's certainly my point, because a lot of people are like, well, I'm just a bunch of chemicals. I'm like, no, that's not the right fucking to frame your life.
Yeah. The just is the problem there because you are a bag of chemicals, but the, functional
the just is the fucking problem. It's not just matter and energy. You're also a living organism. You're a mental organism that actually has experiences. You're a human organism that justifies what the fuck you're doing. So you're not just a bag of chemicals. You're this and all these other layers of complexification. And indeed, if you pay attention to what you care about, it's the culture, person, animal, mental layers of complexification that you actually give a shit about. You'll just be a bag of chemicals when you fucking die.
Exactly. You'll be worth $1.98 or whatever it was. They when I was a kid, I used to say it was 98 cents. What is the value of you as a series of elements, right? But it's the structural functional stuff that has emerged over billions of years. That's the interesting part. I'm still in awe of life, for instance, right?
It is totally.
And in the fact that every single alive thing on Earth that's alive today, as far as we can tell, has a single first common ancestor.
Luca, baby. Last universal common ancestor.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing, right?
That's unbelievable.
And that
almost makes you religious, doesn't it, Jim?
Fuck no. But and of course, the question of the origin of life is still a big open question. And
I agree that there's, we're not.
We had some great people at Sante Fe Institute working on it.
Do you have do you like lipid formation? You like RNA world? I know you're kind of skeptical of the final jump, but have you put your money on any particular origin of life horse?
don't know enough about it. I mean, I've read a lot about it and talked to some of the leading thinkers in the field.
Me neither. So I was
but at this point, I'm just sort of sitting back and waiting for the experts to learn more. Though I will say, even Harold Morowitz was my guru in this space. He was one of the inventors of the field of origins of life. Passed away a couple of years ago, and he and Eric Smith wrote an astoundingly good book on it. Harold, to his dying day, did not rule out panspermia. The idea that because of this, as I've talked about before, this very difficult problem of how do you get from the RNA world to the DNA world, is no obvious way, right? And the argument from evolution is tenuous at best, right? Maybe it happened once in the galaxy and has been gradually spreading around the galaxy via rogue comets and what have you. Maybe, but he has other theories. One of them is that we have not explored pressure and temperature as much as we should have for the reactions, and maybe it was the pressure and temperature deep within the Earth, maybe a mile below the surface, where the pressure and temperature allowed reactions to occur that don't occur at standard temperature and pressure.
Yep.
And again, on the other hand, if he had to put a single bet down, he put a small bet down on the chemical evolution at the black cloud steamers in the bottom of the ocean, where hydrogen sulfide and other energy-rich compounds were coming raw out of the earth and provided the fuel for the origin of life. But he's not highly confident of it. He's still entertained deep earth. He still entertained panspermia and says, we just don't know. And so if Harold says he don't know, Jim says he don't know.
Fair enough. I'm in the same boat. I recently read Lane's, I think it's Vital Questions or something, 2016 book on alkaline vents as affording a particular fascinating set of structures that do enable at least a vision of creating lipid structures plus the capture RNA structures and then put them together. And you may want to fill that step in, but
it's like the old cartoon.
Then a miracle happens.
And then a miracle occurs.
I think your proof needs a little more. There might be some more things to be filled out there.
I still, just to reiterate, I had an amazing 4-hour conversation with Stuart Kaufman about this one time about, the problem is that the error catastrophe, from the math of evolution, when the error rate in duplication is too high, you can't build much structure in evolution. You can build a little bit, but not a lot. And the amazing complexity of the DNA replication and error checking machinery. How the hell you could have been bootstrapped that from the high error rate RNA world in a mere 500 million years? I still find mathematically implausible.
It's definitely one of the. Of course, it's on the TOK. It's one of the great jumps of complexification.
Stuart agreed. He said he knew about as much about this as anybody. He said, "Yep, you are correct that we do not have a." Was it just pure blind luck or what? Or is there some mechanism that we don't understand? But anyways, so I remain completely agnostic on origin of life, just as I do my other favorite question, which is, are we alone? The search for extraterrestrial intelligence. As a nerdy 14-year-old, I was sure the answer was, of course, there's tens of thousands of civilizations out there. Just read Heinlein, right? And Asimov. But the more I've learned, the more I'm able to hold in the view that it's possible that we are alone. And if we are, it's scary and exciting. It means that humanity has an even bigger obligation not to blow itself up, right? And maybe our destiny is to bring the universe to life, this big, cold, physical, somewhat uninteresting universe, which we're the tiniest little speck. But yet, if we can survive the next few thousand years, perfectly plausible we could bring the universe to life.
If you look at the universe through the lens of complexification, I like to say we burn like a quasar of complexity in the night sky. If you look at
we are, as far as we know, the level of complexity and the level of reverse entropy, as you say, it's a quasar level compared to anything else.
Yes, in the ballpark. Nothing else in the damn ballpark that we're aware of. But obviously, right, and all the weird, UFO shit, that, but it's head scratching shit. But anyway, nothing in it for me enough to say, we're not by any stretch. But anyway.
But I think the big meta thing here is people say is that to living with the statement, I don't know, we don't know. And so many people find that difficult. Like people, it seems like, and this is, some of Vervaeke, some other people, some people seem to really want some overarching meaning for life, meaning for human life. And I go, why would we expect to have a view on that at this early stage when we're just this tiny little speck and don't really understand physics fully yet, don't understand biology at all, don't understand the brain hardly at all? Why should we have a view on the overarching meaning of life at this stage? Seems to me a ridiculous thing to aspire to. I'm very happy to say, I don't know. And, humanity may eventually get enough knowledge of all these other disciplines to be able to have a perspective, or it may be it's one of those unanswerable things. And that's okay. We have a universe. We have a universe. We have some capacities. Let's go do something interesting.
Well, my frame on that, yes, I start with agnosticism. I'm a scientist. You don't start with fundamental capital T truth shit. What the fuck? Anything that whatever the real is, we develop these models of it based on our talking ape capacities. So totally. The one thing I will say though is that we are on the cusp of building better fucking models of the whole. That's what the whole Enlightenment 2.0 for me, certainly centered on the tree of knowledge and the whole garden. It's like, actually, we can map the complexification that we have mapped with a lot more fucking coherence than the current intelligentsia would have you believe. So that's the pitch on the other side of actually, there's a lot more unified knowledge available to us where you can then specify with a lot more coherence than seems to be the case if you just go on to closer to truth and push play and you get 6 billion different perspectives that at least if you're not listening, know how to listen, they don't cohere. We can learn how to listen so they cohere. At least that's my little unified theory pitch.
And I absolutely agree with you. And in fact, I find tiresome on the flip side, the people who set up this straw man of ultra reductionist science, right? If you talk to any great scientist today, I talk to a great scientist regularly, I don't know one that's a radical reductionist.
I think that's a dying breed.
And they all, varying degrees. I mean, some are, the Sante Fe Institute people are just native complexitarians. And
there's a wide variety of species.
There's a wide variety, but I don't know any top tier scientists who's a radical reductionist today. And this idea that which you read a lot in some, especially alternative kinds of stuff in the Game B adjacent space of setting up this straw man against modern science strikes me as also an overreaction.
Right. No, you get sort of a post-material woo on one hand. Oh, well, we figured out that it's not material. Like, no, that's not exactly. And then you get this hyper reduction on the other. And then we need to organize the complex adaptive systems in between for coherence. And if we do that, we can actually.
And that's where the interesting stuff is right now. Essentially, all the interesting questions that humanity confronts are interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, non-disciplinary, complex phenomena. And more of the best thinkers are moving into that space, which is, again, one of the reasons why we should be at least cautiously optimistic about our future.
Actually, there's one more question I have as we begin to look up. I love your podcast, where you said, if I ask you sort of like, hey, what have been some super exciting podcasts? Any come to mind in relationship to, as you use the podcast capacity, look out at the horizon of folks that you would want our listeners to go check out?
Let's see. That's an interesting question. Let me pull up my podcast and see what I have done recently.
There was an interesting one on the evolution of technology. I think it was Brian Arthur.
That's a great one. Brian Arthur is both a good friend and an amazingly good thinker on the real nature of.
From a UTOK perspective, I was particularly interested in that because, as people know, so UTOK with the tree of knowledge, it's a mapping the natural evolution of behavioral complexity and really taps out at sort of our technology. You have to bridge from our evolutionary behavior into technology. So I would certainly orient people to that evolution of technology, because it's that bridge from our justification systems and capital C culture narrator into technology that also is the interface that gives rise to society. Yep.
So that's some of the ones. Here's a don't miss if you are interested in these kinds of questions. My recent episode with Robin Dunbar.
Oh, you had Robin Dunbar on, huh? I missed that. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, it was.
Well,
I think it was one of the great classics.
Beautiful.
And then the one I published this morning with Heather Haying and talking about her book with her husband, Brett Weinstein, called A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century.
Beautiful.
Extraordinarily interesting.
One of these days I'm going to tell Brett about the justification systems theory, so he can upgrade his narrative about how our evolution shifts into our religious belief systems.
Yep. If you're interested in sort of my background in evolutionary computing and where it touches artificial intelligence, wonderful episode with Ken Stanley, episode 137 on neuroevolution. That's the applying of evolutionary theory to the evolution of neural net.
Is that like Gerald Edelman's stuff? I mean, neural Darwinism was his. Anyway, I wonder if it has a descendant in Gerald Edelman's neural Darwinism.
When I go to my podcast page now, there's something wrong with it. And it plays like all the podcasts.
Okay. You're hitting click and it's
pre-clicking them all for me. Let's see. I'm going to go with a couple of other good ones. This is a amateur scientist who's done amazingly interesting work. He's been working on it for 20 years, finally published a book on it. I read the book. I was impressed. I reached out to him. Dennis Waters on behavior and culture in one dimension.
I listened to that one. I really enjoy that. That's he talks about basically the input-output functioning processes, right, in relationship to kind of creating a particular kind of, I can't remember exactly how he identified the fundamental.
Yeah, essentially, the fundamentals is that somewhere along, and he points out to at least two places that are the most significant, evolution found a very interesting trick, which was to encode complex machinery into one dimension.
Yep.
And then to co-evolve the machinery to turn it into three dimensions.
Yep.
And the first example he gives is the DNA show, right?
Yep.
It goes a fair amount into RNA to DNA and all that. But really, it's the DNA, RNA, proteomics cluster that co-evolved. And the information is actually stored in one dimension on the DNA, but the ribosomes and all the rest of the machinery is a mechanism by which you turn that information in one dimension into another cell in three dimensions.
Right. And I think, as you rightfully pointed out, actually 4, if we then put that in time motion.
Correct. And I said, let's add 4 because life is inherently dynamic. And he agreed.
Exactly.
And then his other one was language, which is a single dimension. And he makes a very interesting argument that it's written language even more than oral language. And Socrates would agree with him for both better and worse. Right? Remember, Socrates hated writing famously.
He did indeed.
He thought it was the ruination of humanity.
Right.
But Dennis makes some very cogent arguments on how writing is fundamentally different than speaking, and that writing is clearly very linear. And we can take, let's say, for instance, a recipe and turn it into an apple pie. And there's an example of one dimension being converted through machinery, in this case, a human who knows how to cook, into something in 4 dimensions, an apple pie, which we then eat for dinner tonight, right?
Amen.
And so that is a very non-trivial idea. And this is a really good book from a guy who's not known at all. So that's another really interesting one I'd like to call out. So those are some of my favorites from the last few months of the Jim Rutt Show.
And folks can immediately tie that insight, basically an information processing, storage, computational aspect relative to the physical mechanical world aspect to, what the TOK says. Yep, genetics, neural networks, and language is an information processing communication network system imputed upon real chemical, physical, behavioral systems. And it is those things that do network together to afford complex adaptive behavior at various levels of dimensions of organization. So sweet.
Yeah, I love the fact that all these things that we're all working on have some real relationship to each other.
And then we can build a coherent pluralism as we plug in, if we all cultivate that particular kind of mindset and then network ourselves together, we can build a tapestry of understanding from a multitude of different perspectives, but not leaves coherence. That's what I feel like we're on the cusp of.
Well said.
Well, we're getting near the end here. Is there anything that we didn't cover, or any future thoughts that you want to afford us to leave us with as we begin to wrap up this conversation?
Well, let me give a plug for one of my little side projects.
Okay.
I just published a mobile game called Network Wars.
I heard Jordan Hall told me about this. Yeah. So actually, okay. Yeah, I'm actually right. Yeah. Tell me. Talk.
Yeah, he's become utterly obsessed with it. He claims he spent 2,000 hours playing it.
Oh, Jesus. All right.
He was one of my first testers. So I said he and I are just very close collaborators. Sure. And it's an exceedingly simple game. It's on currently on the Apple App Store. Network Wars, 2 words. It's a game that I specifically designed to be as simple as possible. Literally takes 10 seconds to learn. Okay. But it takes weeks, months to master.
It's like Othello.
Yeah, exactly, right? And in fact, my tagline on it is deceptively simple, but very deep, right? Okay. And you can feel yourself extracting patterns. And in fact, I originally designed it as a science project to explore the idea of heuristic induction. Okay. Which when I talk to John Vervaeke, I'm going to compare and contrast his idea of relevance realization with heuristic induction. I've come to the view that the two are related but aren't quite the same thing. And the idea is that you're confronted with a noisy environment, and Network Wars is noisy. There's a fair amount of stochasticity in it. Okay. A game takes like 5 minutes, and every game is different. Each game is essentially a different puzzle, but exactly the same mechanics apply. And some tactics and strategies work on some games and some work on others. Okay. And so you develop heuristics and meta heuristics to let you get better and better and better at playing the game. And I argue that this is a good exercise for your mind to gradually extract from the noisy environment at least 50. I've written down 50 heuristics that I've discovered so far, and I'm sure there's more. So I encourage people who want to see a truly elegant game, if I do say so myself, that has a gigantic strategic space to explore that you will not master anytime soon. Network Wars at the Apple App Store. And just a final plug, one of the things I hate about the current state of mobile games is you see a lot of so-called free ones that are full of ads and come-ons and time limits and in-game purchases. Network Wars has none of that shit. No ads, no promos, no come-ons. 99 cents. You buy it once, play it forever. It's a hell of a deal.
Hey, that is a hell of a deal. Wow, that's really and perfect. I mean, in relationship both to how we can, cultivate our particular individual structures, see patterns, network together. How are we going to network our Game B system relative to Game A? I love that analogy, and affords us a capacity to kind of build a bridge across a wide variety of different things. Your life has been a hell of an interesting set of networks, I will say, Jim. It's been a fascinating journey. I deeply appreciate you walking us through that and giving all sorts of different aspects and facets, and a hell of a lot of shit to come. It's really been beautiful.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to come on and chat with you. You've got yourself kind of in the middle of this thing as well. So
I got sucked in, I'm just a humble psychologist over here going, think I discovered something. It's like, all of a sudden, fuck that. I'm actually in this crowd.
Your tree of knowledge stuff is a serious contribution, I think, to help us all make sense of this. So, thank you for your work as well. I think, we're all working together in co-creating the future.
Hey, man, coherent pluralism. Let's do it together. Love it. Game B, here we come. All righty, friend. Great. Thank you so much.
All right. Been fun.